This is your what I would like to call your first exposure to the Houdini interface. We're going to just kind of dive right in there, look at the first things that you see when you open the program, and start making stuff. So let's get started. Okay, so here we are in the Houdini interface. You can see we've got a nice shelf full of things up top here. We've got a couple of windows here. So let's just, first things first, let's actually save our file. So I'm going to say save as, and I'm going to navigate to our project folder, or lesson files, lesson 1, and I will save this as lesson_01.hip, accept. And if your interface does not look like the interface that I'm working on right now, I'm on the build desktop. So you can click up here. There's this menu that, says build or whatever other menu, other workspace layout it is. You can drop this down and choose build. Or if you're already on build and yours somehow looks different, you could reload the current desktop and it will, snap everything back into this sort of default layout, just so that we're all on the same page. So here we are. What do we see? We've got a whole bunch of stuff up top. This looks like a bunch of fun stuff we can play with. These are your shelf. I'm going to just dive in and throw it on a sphere. So you'll see once you click the sphere button up here, it gives you this sort of orange or red bounding box that indicates where your sphere is going to go. And if you look down here at the bottom of this window, there is a little kind of a tooltip that says select the position for the sphere, hold shift to move off the construction plane. So I can select a position. I'm just going to kind of choose one near the origin here and click, and there's our sphere. And you can see over here in the network view, it has created a sphere object. And in the parameter view right here, these are your parameters of the sphere. You can change the scale and you can, set its translation. I'm just going to set it to the origin. So I'm going to hit 0, tab 0, tab 0, and that sort of just zeroes out our sphere. I'm also going to set the scale back to 1. Another just important note is you can see down here, there is a status indicator in the lower left-hand corner that sort of tells you what the program is doing. You can see it just had a message up there that said that it successfully saved this project. I'm going to just hit Control S one more time so you can kind of see it appearing down there. This little area is always good to look at. If anything's happening, it's usually telling you if it's cooking geometry, what node it's being processed. If it's doing something super complicated, it kind of gives you a hint as to what is going on if you look down there. And it also gives you an option to escape if you need to. If something is going crazy, which we'll run into plenty of times during this course, things are going to break and it's going to be a blast. But for now, let's just continue going through the basic interface here. So up top here on our shelf, you can see we've got other tabs for other things that the shelf can do for us, such as modeling tasks, rigging tasks. And then over here, there's, lights, cameras, there's fluids, particle fluids, pyro, we can make fireballs, all sorts of stuff. These are great starting points, and I'm always using them to reverse engineer what it is that SideFX has set up as like sort of a baseline standard way of doing things. They're great starting points. They're great jump starts into more complex sims. They're great starting points to get you set up with some setups that are really fun to tear apart and extend and make way more complicated as well. So I'm going to just hop back to the Create tab here, and let's look back down here at our scene view. Our scene view similarly has a bunch of tabs. There's the animation editor, which is more like your curve editor, your render view, and then you got composite view, motion effects view, geometry spreadsheet. Those are all different windows that will come into play when you're trying to accomplish certain tasks in Houdini, such as rendering and animating and compositing. For right now, we're just going to stick in our scene view. And let's look at what some of these other tabs are. If we go over here by our parameter view, you can see we've got a take list. This is similar to the take system in Cinema 4D, works very similarly. And then there's a performance monitor, which is, kind of used for debugging and optimizing your scene, figuring out what things are running slow so that you can fix them. Down here in the network view, we've got a couple more tabs. There's the tree view. the material palette, and the asset browser, which links you to Orbolt, which is sort of like a marketplace for Houdini assets. So in our case, let's just push this through and get a quick little render going. I'm going to hop back over to the material palette. You can see that there's a bunch of presets on this left-hand side here. The most generic shader that ships with Mantra, which ships with Houdini. Mantra is the render engine that is physically based, that is created by Side Effects and comes with Houdini. It's a very powerful render engine. It runs on the CPU as of the time of this recording. So you may want to look into using third-party engines, which we'll get into later. But for right now, I'm going to grab this principled shader, and I'm just going to click this arrow to create one over in our material browser here. This is very similar to like the material manager in Cinema 4D. So now that we've got this principled shader, I'm just going to drop that on our sphere. You can see it kind of changes the look of the sphere because that material has been applied. Up here, I still have the performance monitor enabled. I'm going to go back to the parameters view. And you can see here, if you go to the surface tab, you've got all your basic controls. Specular, your albedo, your reflection, transparency, all that stuff. So let's throw down a grid and like as a floor object and just get this dialed in. So we're going to put a grid down. We're just going to click on grid. And then instead of actually clicking in this viewport, I'm just going to hit enter. Hitting enter will make the object appear at world origin. So when I navigate back over here to the network view, you can see we've created these two objects, a sphere object and a grid object. I'm just going to grab the grid object and pull it down a little bit so it's resting under the sphere. And then in the uniform scale, I'm going to set it up to, let's say 10, just so that it's big enough to take up our entire view. Cool. Now that we've got that, I'm going to, let's just switch over to our render view and fire off a render real quick. It's going to take just a second. Up here you can see a status that it is generating the scene and then rendering. Our buckets are starting to show up. I'm going to middle mouse scroll to zoom in a little bit. And we have a sphere. And it's just really basic lighting. You can tell it's just a headlight. There's hardly anything going on with it. I'm going to stop that render. We're going to flip back over here. I'm going to click the area light button up here on our shelf. Come over here. You can see that the area light appears. I'm just going to drag it up a little bit. And you can see that it gives us this nice rotation handle that sort of acts as like a little, like a contact lens almost, that you can kind of rotate it along and position it along. It's just a kind of handy little handle. And let's also put down an environment light. I'm going to click the environment light, and in our parameters, you can see, well, down here in our network view, it creates an environment light. Then up here in our parameters, we've got all our parameters for the environment light. I'm going to click this little arrow with a page icon to select an environment map to put in there. Houdini comes with a couple environment maps or HDRIs just so that you can have something running really quickly just, prototype. So you can find those over here on the left-hand side of this browser that is the generic browser for Houdini. Down here where it says HFS Houdini Pick HDRI, click on that and you've got 3 images you can choose from. You can obviously load other images in here if you want, but for our purposes, we just need something quick. I'm going to right-click in here and choose Show Images. And I'm just going to select this first one, HDRI, Haven, Kiara, 5 Noon, 2K. Any one that you want to choose is fine. And I'll hit Accept. And the lighting of our scene changes a little bit. That's cool. The next thing I'm going to do is let's make a material for the floor. We're going to go back over to the material palette here. And instead of creating a shader and dragging it over here, I can actually just go and grab something like concrete and just drag it directly onto the ground plane. So now it's over here. You can see it's created a concrete for us, and we have our principled shader. Excellent. I'm going to just switch back over to our render view to see how things are going. We're going to update that. So I'm clicking render up here, and it's generating scene up over here. That's good. And buckets are starting to show up. And there we go. We are rendering a sphere on the concrete ground. It's looking pretty blown out. I'm going to just hop over to the environment light And I'm going to, on the light tab, bring the light intensity back down just a little bit. And it's looking good. And then let's see, we'll go to the, let's go back to the material palette. Click on our principled shader, which was being applied to our sphere. I just want to bring the roughness down slightly and the albedo down slightly so I really can start to see this reflecting. Let's bring this down a little bit more. And yeah, so there you can see we've got a nice shiny sphere. That's good. And I'll just let this resolve a little bit longer. Maybe what I'll do while that's doing, let's see, I can hop back. See, this has moved us over into our material context. If you get stuck in something that does not look like your main area, you just click in this little drop down up here and select the object level. I'll explain what all this means later, but just make sure that, you know, this bar up here is on the object context, and you should be able to find all of your things in your scene here. Maybe I'll just crank up this area light a little bit hotter, and maybe I'll just bring it up slightly like so, like that. And maybe I'll even bring the environment light back down to 0.05 just so that we can really kind of see the area light doing its magic there. Cool. So I know that this is a really terrible render, but here we are. We've made it to our first rendering in Houdini, and we've only been in here for, you know, a few minutes. It's awesome. So with that, I'm going to just stop this where it is. It's good enough for now, our purposes. And down here, where you see this little text box that says $hip IPR snap name $f4 savenum.exr. This is sort of just a quick way to save whatever's in your IPR here. These are all tokens. If you're familiar with tokens in Cinema 4D, this is the same concept. Hip is pointing to wherever the file is saved, wherever the project file is saved, and then it's creating a new directory for IPR saves. And what we can do is I'm just going to scroll to the end of this, and instead of saving an EXR file, I'm just going to change this extension to a .jpg for a JPEG and hit this. I'm going to hover over it, hit the save render button, boom, and then switch back over to my Windows Explorer, and you can see that here it's created next to my lesson file. It's created an IPR folder. And double click on that, and you can see that it has created our active render.00.01.0.jpg or whatever. Double click and boom, there you have it. Your first rendering in Houdini out, saved in Windows, and wow, what an accomplishment. I mean, this is so next level. I mean, people are going to be wondering how we did this, how it's even possible to do this insane Houdini magic that is only possible in Houdini. I mean, it is just mind-blowing. At any rate, Houdini is known for being a pretty complicated piece of software, and we barely had to touch anything. So why? Why is that? Well, you know, this is sort of the way that SideFX has been taking the development of the software in recent years, is to make this a more artist-friendly tool, giving you more options on the shelf and just other interface stuff that just makes it a slightly more intuitive piece of software to use. Using the shelf and these views, we were able to, you know, add lights to our scene, a grid. We barely had to touch these nodes down here that were created in our network view for us. But, you know, that being said, a lot was going on in the background that we were not really made aware of. The beauty of Houdini is that, you know, like many other applications where you're using the application, it's, yeah, definitely doing a ton of stuff in the background. But in the case of Houdini, the stuff that's happening in the background is actually available to you. So, you know, in regards to our materials palette, you know, our materials are actually creating materials in our material context like this. And these are shaders. If I unlock this and say allow editing of contents and jump into this shader, I'm going to hit Control B to make this network view enlarged. You can see that just by laying down that principled shader, it laid down this entire massive network of this Uber shader for us, and we could hop into any section of this and start customizing things. Like, this, what is this? This is the coat roughness. And down here, I think this is all the displacement section. Yeah, this whole section is dedicated to creating displacement on our materials. Now, do you have to do this? No, you're not required to know how this shader works. In fact, I rarely spend any time in here, if any at all. But you can get that low level with Houdini. That's the beauty of it, is, on the surface level, you're creating things, you're designing things, you're using the tool as you would, want to, in a more tactile way. And when you want to get technical with it, you can get super technical with it. So now that we've gotten past this first major step here, I know that it was fast. I know that it was probably slightly confusing and a little bit rushed, but really we just needed to see what we can do. We just really needed to get used to controlling what these different windows are. Now in the next section, we're going to really kind of, we're going to get into the weeds as to what really all these icons on the side mean, what we can do with all these different parameters, etc. And how the network views work. And it's really going to kind of make this whole experience that we just went through become much more clear, so that when we continue to go through these processes throughout the course of this course, it's going to become more and more natural. But we really just wanted to establish some sort of familiarity with what a workflow can look like, and simply take you from nothing to having a rendered image as quickly as possible, just as an intro primer. So I hope that was enjoyable for you, and let's, continue to dive in just a little bit deeper every time. Thanks a lot. I'm going to start this whole thing off with 3 bold words. Houdini is easy. I am here to tell you that you are in the right place. Stay tuned. Do some particle simulations, some fluid simulations, just all the simulations. Let's just run this again. For all of you who are like me, who love computers and graphics and animation, you got this! An introduction to Houdini for motion designers and Cinema 4D artists looking to expand their skills. My apologies for the lame recording. I'm making this up as I go. You really do need to know what this stuff is to do the cool things. Sooner or later, your brain is going to start making connections. You came, you conquered, you saw. And congratulations for making it this far. Why didn't I know this existed? Cheers. I'm proud of you. I'm a little bit emotional now, I'm not gonna lie. Stop being afraid of Houdini. Without further ado, let's let the learning begin.
Mograph.com, an online resource for motion graphic artists. Start your week with the Mograph podcast. Industry news, interviews with your favorite artists, and terrible humor. Watch live shows and interviews from Mograph events like NAB, SIGGRAPH, Half-Res, and local meetups. Our Mograph Talks feature live demos and motivation from artists all around the world.
Sometimes you gotta make stuff that you're not gonna put on your reel, and I'm not here to judge.
What if Rick and Morty show up for the countdown at midnight? That's where I peaked in life, in my career.
We gotta stop this thing, Rick! It's gonna kill us all!
Hear from the people that create your software, design your render engines, and artists that are changing the face of modern motion graphics.
You get that render done. Yeah, you better frame what?
Mograph tutorials and online classes will teach you about Cinema 4D, After Effects, as well as other popular software and render engines.
Throw in the HDR Studio, take the render settings, pick the HDR, put in a reflection, and gorgeous.
Branch into new software, learn time-saving tips, techniques, workflows, and lessons that'll keep you up to date in the world of motion design.
Oh, brother, those are some of my favorite elves.
I love projects that scare me. When our art director comes to us and asks for something that I had never done before, man, it gets me pumped.
Join the conversation in our live sessions. Check out our plugins or join the hundreds of daily active users in our Slack channel for technical help, advice, contests, or just to joke around.
Real nice banana.
That's so funny. All right. I'm going to live forever.
Subscribe today and get the latest updates on our YouTube and other social media channels.
Take all your dreams and just do it!
We don't care how you get here, folks. Just get here.
Subscribe to Mograph.com.